About being oneness people for a while now. And last week, Doug said something that resonated with me. So we tell ourselves a story. We build our worlds on the foundation of core, meaning-making stories. But when we build our lives on truth that isn't true enough, it'll eventually betray us. Because what goes around does come around. Let's listen carefully to the stories we hear, the stories we tell, and the patterns that take on a life of their own. Because it's the story that always gets us. So this week, I've been tasked with telling a story about belonging. By Doug. Here are the questions we'll discuss later for you to be thinking about. We'll be talking about belonging. We'll be talking about community. We'll be talking about transforming those understandings for ourselves. Because not all of us were born into communities in which we were allowed to belong or in which we felt ourselves to belong. Because of that, for me, this quote. I don't know if it's entirely accurate. Those of you who've done more Bible studies than me, which would be one, could tell me. I tried to Google it. Is it in fact true, what Richard Rohr says here? But Google was being elusive. Jesus praised faith and trust even more than love. It takes a foundational trust to fall or to fail. Faith alone holds you while you stand, waiting and hoping and trusting. Then and only then will deeper love happen. For me, this quote gave me hope and optimism because the first several months I was doing spiritual direction with Doug, most of my questions were about love. Feeling it, feeling the wrong thing, not feeling it, not feeling the right thing. So if it's in fact true that Jesus praised faith and trust even more than love, I consider that a good thing. So first, faith, the substance of hope. So again, good morning. My name is Heather. I've tried in the last nearly 2 years since I first came to Common Thread to personally meet as many of you as possible. And I think I did a pretty good job just judging from the people who are in the chapel this morning. I was raised by an Army brat and a first-generation American as an Army brat in expat circles. So I've often felt like a kid in a candy store here at Common Thread. You are a generous, interesting, and conscientious group of people who seem to have come together around what sometimes seems like not much more than faith in faith itself. And faith, not in the religious sense, but as an expression of hope, has been a common thread throughout my life. So Doug asked me to tell a story today about my own personal struggle with being oneness people in a two-ness world, which to me is a struggle with belonging. But the story falls into two parts: what happened and what it means to me. Trust. And this is not my own idea, so I put it in quotes. A core conviction of judgment based on experience. What happened is pretty simple. Starting almost 2 years ago, I have been working hard to show myself to be trustworthy in a community whose name I won't mention, that I didn't have any intention of belonging to in the sense of receiving as well as giving. And as a result, a member of this community, who shall remain anonymous, but it's Christy, trusted me enough to ask me for my help. And when she did, I absolutely did not want to do it, though I did want to have done it, if you see the distinction. And it wasn't just because it was pouring out rain and I was in my pajamas, but because being asked to show up in community is a new thing. But I could also just about grasp that this might be a pivotal moment in my progress towards reaching this goal I'd been working towards for nearly 2 years. So I went, and it was profoundly uncomfortable for me, but not because it didn't go just fine, but because I actually listened to the stories I was telling myself in my head while I was helping, and this is what they sounded like. Can I be different and still belong? Can I be an outsider and still belong? Can I still be me and belong? Can I belong but not be obligated? Can I be obligated? Can I be loved as I am? Can I be loved? Can I love myself? Can I love God? Can I love what belongs to God? Can I love you? Can I be me and belong to you? Can I be me and be you? That experience was, by far, not the first time I had experienced this pattern. Yearn for community, reach out with gifts in hand, be accepted, be embraced, refuse gifts given in return, pull away, run away. And God knows I came by it honestly enough. I was born in Miami. We moved to Bamberg, Germany. We moved to Madrid, Spain. We moved to Augusta, Georgia in 1979. We moved to Sacramento, California. We moved to Massachusetts. We moved to Ohio. I moved to Philadelphia. I moved to Vermont. I moved to Annapolis, Maryland. I moved to France. I moved to North Carolina. I feel like I'm forgetting some places. So God knows I came by it honestly enough, and I could tell many more, these stories I've told about myself and the patterns that therefore took on a life of their own that for many years became my life. But honestly, they're such sad stories, and I'm so tired of telling them. So just one more, because it's essential to the story of why I'm here today, and though it is a sad story, it has a happy ending. Love, the gift of blessing. I'm also speaking in church today because I want to be a minister. I've been a language and cultural orientation teacher and teacher trainer for adult immigrants and refugees to the United States for 20 years. And despite being a lifelong secular humanist straddling the line between atheism and agnosticism, I don't see this decision as a radical change. Over the course of my teaching career, which ended 3 years ago, my classrooms had become ministries. And I see a fellow ESL teacher today, and I think she can affirm for me that they often feel like ministries. Though I didn't then know to use that word to describe what happened there between me and my students, and how sometimes I washed their feet, and sometimes they washed mine. Eventually, though, I came to realize that because I was the teacher and they were the students, with all of the power dynamics involved therein, that this community I had forged for myself, which had given me so much joy, had also become a place where I could hide out from the aspect of community that was most difficult for me: mutual obligation, reciprocity, vulnerability, and pat myself on the back for doing so, because I worked with refugees. So I left teaching. I left a community where I felt belonging, where I felt beloved, and I loved in return. And I've missed those classrooms every single day since then, even while knowing it was the right decision. It took me 5 years to decide to take that hero's journey, by the way. And what gave me the insight and the resolve to do it was one of the most profound experiences of community that a person can have. I spent nearly a year with this group of students. Near the end of our time together, my father died. My mother called at 9:30 to tell me, and I took the call right there where I was standing at the board, where I'd been talking through the day's lesson plan, because my phone had been laying on my desk. as always, in case my toddler's school called. I collapsed, and Vong, the matriarch of our class, you can see her there in the middle. She probably prepared all of that food. She took my phone to tell my mother that she'd have me call her back and that I was okay. My students made me sit in a chair and gathered around me, rubbing my feet and my hands, bringing me a cup of tea, blessing me and praying for me, holding me upright while I cried. And when I returned to class from the funeral 4 days later, because I needed the money for that expensive preschool, they were there waiting for me, and I had to face them with my need and my vulnerability and the undeniable truth of those, and continue to be their teacher, even though there were no more lesson plans that semester, but they covered for me. In the following years, when I ran into them at the stores and restaurants where they work around town, they continue to this day to greet me the same way. Are you doing better now, teacher? Do you need anything? So that's what happened. I left teaching 5 years later because over those intervening years, my teaching deepened to the point where we weren't doing school anymore, except in the most superficial sense. I began to want what had been implicit to become explicit. Because people can learn everything and anything they need to learn once we get out of our own way and love each other as we love ourselves. It's that weird paradoxical equation that I want to teach for the rest of my life. My goal is to be right back in a room one day with the people who were my students, but as their pastor, not their teacher. And to do so, I have to learn how to belong in a community defined by what sometimes seems like not much more than faith in faith itself. So that's what happened, and this is what it means to me. Common Thread is the first church I've ever attended. When I initially showed up on Doug's doorstep, asking at first for spiritual direction, it was because I'd realized I couldn't be sure whether I was a good person or just a sheltered, privileged, lucky one. I've met so many people in 20 years in my classrooms who had to confront how deep did their commitment to being good people go when everything they had was taken away, when everything they had was lost. So I tested Doug for 6 months with a series of questions about religion designed to show him how smart I am, while subtly and stealthily trying to determine whether he was for real. He was calling himself the minister of a church whose credo purported to be, if you're here, you belong. And while I secretly doubted that could possibly be sincere or true, I was ready finally to find out for sure. So in the spring, I told him our conversations had revealed to me that my concern over being a good person did in fact appear to be rooted in a belief in a moral universe. I said it just like that. And that I wanted to be part of what was clearly the only show in town as I saw it as a minister. I described my secular humanism in great detail, though, to make sure he understood that I had no intentions of giving any of that up. But he asked me to trust him, and he offered me an internship. I call myself internship number one. He suggested the number one intern, but I felt like that was a little self-aggrandizing. Well, let's hope Father Rohr, Jesus, and Doug are right about this, because the prospect of going empty-handed and in need to people still makes me want to crawl out of my skin. And I have a sneaking suspicion, as they say, that the spiritual journey involves receiving as well as giving. I actually made that realization one night during the early days of the pandemic lockdown, that I didn't have to earn back my very life. I had been lying in bed in the dark while my family was asleep, for weeks upon weeks. You probably remember. The schools closed the second week of March. I realized I was going to have to homeschool 2 kids. I've been a teacher for 20 years, but only ever with adults. So I was staying up late at night, just trying to grapple with all of it. And as a lifelong hypochondriac, it almost seemed as if this had been orchestrated specifically for me, because the universe does, from my perspective, seem to revolve around me. So I had been lying in the bed in the dark for night after night while my family was asleep, which was the only time in long days when 2 kids and a husband who no longer ever left the house weren't needing me to give them something. And I lay there in the dark reviewing my life, literally reviewing and evaluating every year in order to identify every key decision, in order to analyze it in terms of mistake or not mistake. Did anyone else do that in the early days of the pandemic? I imagine we all regard the sum of the parts of our lives, if not every separate piece, through one lens or another, whether we're particularly aware of it or not. Material success and achievement as productive and therefore good. Does anybody fall into that category? Fulfilled obligations of care and protection to those we feel responsible to as right and therefore good. Contribution of valued and significant effort as important and therefore good. For me, the lens is meaningful, and I understand that as living a life in which I am genuine in my pursuit to connect with others and with myself as I seek what is true and real. For example, I come from a working class background. My father is the first person on both sides of the family to get a college degree, and I'm the first woman. I'm the first woman on my father's side of the family to graduate from high school without being pregnant, as a matter of fact. So meaningful and genuine with pursuit to connect with others and with myself has been important as I've entered into spheres that were new to me and to the people who knew me and loved me. On one of those dark nights of the soul, then, I examined moments in my life when I had given in to fear and turned away from genuine connection. I felt hopeless and purposeless because for someone whose lens is meaning, to have lost the path of what I consider to be a fundamentally spiritual journey is the stuff of despair. I've experienced a lot of loneliness and fear in a life characterized by feeling myself to be always outside, looking in. And my consolation has always been meaning. I suffer, but I do so for a purpose greater than myself, and so the suffering is redeemed. Sound familiar? To accuse myself, therefore, of a failure to connect is to fail to be genuine and to be estranged from the true and real as a result. I was lying there in the dark, thinking and feeling all of this, and I suddenly realized that my understanding of the cosmos itself, what religion calls God, held out a consolation bigger than mere meaning. I believe that what I see in the world is life upon life upon life, all the way down, everything working to thrive, and in so doing to create yet more life. And so I suddenly saw that like a river flows out from a source, filling every nook and cranny in its path, life itself is its own purpose. Living is the cause of life, and living is the effect of life. Life is God, and God is life. And then I remembered that childhood song I used to hear at the churches I was taken to after sleepovers, Jesus Loves You, and at which I laughed during my adolescence and early 20s. All it ever meant, though, was that I don't have to earn my life back. I don't have to connect or seek and maybe fail because I am already connected. And that realizing this and asking this question, am I truly a good person, means I'm someone who believes that the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And that I believe it is a moral universe because I believe it is a created reality. And I'm okay with calling that God. And that my desire to be a good person is very, very important to me. Because to live in opposition to reality, for me, is to live in denial of God. I literally thought all of this one night during the pandemic. Can I be different and still belong? It might be a dumb question or a self-serving one, but it's not a theoretical question. For those of us without backgrounds in church or with backgrounds in an unwelcoming church, it's probably also not an uncommon question. Belonging, the mutuality and reciprocity of community, it's what I came here to CTC to learn, not theology and church administration and homiletics. I can't change or pretend or hide or lie because I have to believe that my experiences, what here at Common Thread we call our life stories, are all that I have to offer. So it's not a theoretical question. And the more I ask it, the more concrete it becomes. What if the price of belonging was low? What if all it took was faith and you could take your time building trust? What if you took it on faith that love would come? What if the only common thread of humanity, of community, of the small all the way up to the big, was the wish to belong? What if you didn't have to give before you receive? What if a commitment to keep belonging was the only criterion for acceptance? What if you just had to keep showing up and to show up when you're asked to show up? I do believe that we, human beings that is, are one. I believe it because religion, because anthropology, because history, because psychology, because physics. Rather, I know we are. In the same way that though I'm not sure belief in God is required of me, just acknowledgement, I'm damn sure that faith in the importance of living in accord with reality is required of me, if I want to be a moral person. God has never been the problem. I've always intuited that God doesn't require belief, only trust and faith and love. It's always been other people. Walking into cafeterias as the new kid, over and over and over again. It's always been community. And what my story means to me is that the moment I asked to belong, I belonged. So amen to that. In a moment, we'll discuss the live stream and we'll do What Are You Thinking here in the room. Again, if you're on the live stream and would like to host a Zoom What Are You Thinking, Doug will show you how. We have 2 facilitators so far. When we've got 4 to share the load together, we'll start. So if that's you, use the Contact Us button. Doug will get back to you. Also, today's questions are in the live stream notes if you'd like to talk them over at home. Now, if you turn and look at the teleprompter behind you, you'll see that Doug put the word dismissal. And that was it. And I realized that last night while I was lying in bed awake. So Rebecca very kindly listened to the video and wrote it on this clipboard. Unless you'd prefer I just shout the word dismissal. That's fine with me. So if you would put your hand on your heart and let us remember as we go that we are, every one of us, carriers of the indwelling divine. Love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness are in us because we carry the very Spirit of God, the very breath of God. If you would extend your other hand to our city, let's look for opportunities to share what's in us with the people we live and work and go to school with, looking for opportunities to repair and heal our world. Amen. So I would like to try something slightly different today, something in line with what we ESL teachers who have to teach language to a bunch of people who do not have that language. One of the things that we do. Doug has been putting us into small groups, which is